Hey, friends, welcome back to the Big Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Tricia Brouk, founder of the Big Talk Academy, award winning director, producer, and author. And this is episode 632. In this episode, I am talking with the amazing Tamsen Webster. Part message designer, part English to English translator, part magpie, Tamsen helps leaders craft their case for large scale change. In addition to her work in and for major organizations such as Harvard Medical School, Fidelity Investments, and Clavio, she's a judge and mentor for the Harvard Innovations Lab, a professional advisor at the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, and has spent over 10 years as the idea strategist for one of the only 9 legacy level TEDx events in the world. She was named to the Thinkers 50 radar in 2022 and is the author of 2 books, Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Ideas Irresistible, and Say What They Can't Unhear, the 9 Principles of Lasting Change. Tamsen was one of my first guests on the Big Talk way back in episode 21, and I will never forget her graciousness and clarity. She's added so much value and vulnerability for our community, and I am super excited to welcome her back today after all these years. Let's do this. Tamsen, welcome back to the Big Talk Podcast. I'm super excited to have you back.
I am delighted. I know it's been a while, so we've got a lot to catch up on.
We sure do. You were last here in 2018 and you were episode 21.
Oh my
Episode
gosh.
21.
Legal to drink something. Yeah.
You know, you were my first guest.
No. Really?
Yeah.
My
The first
goodness.
20 episodes were solo podcasts, and you were so generous to be my first guest.
Oh my gosh. I did not remember that. And wow, that was 6 years ago. Goodness.
Yeah.
And what are we up to now? Curious.
we're gonna get to that and share with the
Awesome. Okay.
audience like all of the things. But
Super.
what's incredible is I had no idea what I was doing, and so I'm super excited to be able to do this again with you 6 years later when I know a little bit more about how to do this.
Super. Let's do it.
All right. Okay, you had a book, and this is why you're on my podcast then. Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Idea Irresistible. And you've got a second book that's out now, and we're going to get to that. But before we do, take us back a little bit and kind of share with us what has brought you to this point in your life. And you can go back as far as you want. It's sort of like
Sure.
your backstory.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I would say so. There have been two very kind of threads in my personal professional life that go back a long, long way. And one is transformational change, and the other is communication. And I think, like a lot of people, those the sources of those aren't always positive. I would say the focus on transformational change is only slightly newer because I first got very interested in that when I was 17 and I had my first panic attack that landed me in a hospital. And if you're familiar with panic or know anyone who is, then you know that pretty much from that first panic attack, you are pretty interested in anything that may create some kind of transformation so that you don't ever have to have one again. And that was definitely my focus for the 17 years until I was able to find a way to get past it.
Can
But my
I
interest,
pause you
yeah,
for a
yeah, of
second?
course. Yeah,
For our audience, for our listeners who may not know what a panic attack is or
mm,
feels like, or may be able to identify something in themselves based on how you can describe it, would you be willing to share that,
sure, of
Tamsin?
course. Yeah, panic attack. I mean, it feels different to different people, but it almost always feels like you're going to die. um, and what is happening physically in your body is that some tripwire gets crossed, and you start reacting to a non-lethal, non-dangerous situation as if are in physically, as if you're in mortal danger. So for me personally, that would often mean that my heart would start racing. I would start to, your thoughts start to just get super, super, just like trying to get everything to stop, trying to be safe. I would usually start to hyperventilate. In this case, when I was 17, I started to hyperventilate so badly that my hands started to cramp and curl. Sometimes I never hyperventilated myself unconscious, but that is possible as well. But you think you're having a heart attack. You think you just don't even know what's going on. You are suddenly having the worst kind of in-body experience you could ever imagine. Meaning you're fully aware that you are in your body and you seemingly have no control over what it's doing at all. And it's awful. I mean, it's awful. I think in the grand scheme of things, an actual panic attack never lasts more than, few minutes, really. But the effects of that, of what it feels like, and until you really know what's going on, it's truly a traumatic experience. And I don't say that word lightly. I know that trauma has a lot of different impacts on people's lives, but the very first time you experience something like that, it leaves a scar. And like I said, I mean, I think once you've had a panic attack, for whom it turns into a disorder, which is what it was for me, um, it's actually the fear of panicking again that often will trigger yet another panic attack. So it's just this awful catch 22, of this battle really between your body and your brain.
Thank you for sharing that so beautifully. And for those of you who are listening, I hope that this gives you some relief and sense that you're not alone.
Mm-mm.
And Tamsen's going to move into the transformational change that you are have been exploring and now teach. So
Yeah.
move us into that moment where you were like, let's figure out a way to not have this happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it took me a really long time. I mean, I would say that I was in therapy on and off for my panic disorder for 17 years. I had the very unfortunate case that I am allergic to most of the medications for panic. Um, and the last allergic reaction was bad. And so, um, I basically had to go stop taking medication for it cold turkey, which is not a thing you want to do with, with panic medication. It is not pleasant. But then that really meant that if I wanted to live my life without panic, I needed to figure out some actual way to do that. And so, um, I would say, let me skip to the end of that. And, something that played a part was that I realized, I don't know whether I said it to myself or somebody said it to me, but there was a phrase that I couldn't unhear, which is related to the title of the book, which was the thing that I would say to myself over and over again was that I thought my way in so I can think my way out. And that came from the realization that panic disorder, as much as it may be triggered by physical sensations, is actually a disorder of thought, meaning that once those sensations happen, you get into this like doom loop of panicking about it, worrying about it, what if. And once I had that realization, then I became very, very focused on what I needed to do to change it. But that was really overlaid with some other transformational changes that I made in my life. I had, the one that kind of sat in the middle of it was gaining and then losing 50 pounds and then maintaining that loss now for 26 years. And that's definitely the one where because I was more successful at it sooner, I found a way to pay that forward. And, I happened to have chosen a particular weight loss program to do that. And then I had the opportunity to coach other people to do that. And I did that as a moonlighting job for 13 years. And, it taught me a lot about what does and doesn't work when you're talking with people about making change, what actually does, like what works and what doesn't. And I discovered that a lot of the things that I was hearing or was taught even from in my professional life, because I've been a marketer for just about as long, 25 plus years, um, that a lot of the things that marketers do, salespeople do, a lot of personal branding advice in general, positioning advice, actually was opposite of what I would see day in and day out create a transformational change in individuals. And so that was baffling to me because To me, you can't get to organizational change, market level change, societal level change. All of that has to start with individual level first. And so, slowly over time, I started to take what I learned about individual transformational change and what was necessary for people to hear and how that process worked, and started to apply that in my professional life. And, first book was the first product of that. And this is very much the kind of lifetime of lessons all in one book.
Amazing. You have always used your voice. And I know in our first conversation, you shared that you have stage fright and you know how to manage that.
Mm.
When did you realize that you needed to use your voice and to put yourself out there at the cost of your own personal uh, fear and
Mm.
uncertainty?
So, well, first, I'm delighted to say that I've gotten past my stage right now too. So, and I need to give full shout out to a woman named Linda Ugolo, who was absolutely instrumental in
I
that. Right?
love Linda. Linda's
She was great.
amazing.
Yeah.
We love you, Linda.
Yes, and I would say it's not that I don't have, I spent the last 2 days hosting TEDx New England, here in the New England area. And it was very interesting, because it's not that I don't have some of the physical responses of adrenaline rush and whatever. That's normal, but it was lovely to just be like, it's just nice not to be like
Growing up.
super stage fright. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, and it was very much those TEDx events that got me to reach out to Linda in the first place, because I would go on stage like not being able to feel my hands. So, and it was frustrating to me, because again, I haven't, I truly have been now without any form of panic for 17 years. Just happens to be 17 and 17 now. Um, but there was still the stage fright, and I wanted to get past that. So yay, Linda. But the same thing is true then as it is now. And why I'm willing to like put myself through the process of writing a book and all of that. And that is, I, you know, it, and this comes to the communication piece. I think I mentioned that. Like, I grew up in a family, very loving, very privileged in very, very many ways. But I saw this description of family cultures one time described as whether or not your family was a guessing culture or an asking culture. And I feel like I was an asker in a family of guessers. Again, no one way is better than other, but a guessing culture is where nobody voices out loud what they actually want unless they are very sure they're going to get a yes. So you spend a lot of time like guessing what somebody's actually asking, or what they're actually thinking, or what they're actually feeling. Um, and this was not unrelated to my panic disorder, by the way. But, whether it was an adaptation or how I was wired, I learned fairly quickly just to be direct, because it was so confusing for me and so painful for me to like get it wrong in my family, to guess wrong, that I had to learn how to be clearer, or that I wanted to be clear. Still didn't work with my family, but bless them. I love them. It's just, we're wired differently. And I think that is I think that feeling of either I'm getting it wrong when you're trying to figure out what somebody else is saying, or when you are trying to be clear and that you're still getting it wrong, like that's an awful feeling. And it's a particularly awful feeling when you feel like you have something to contribute, when you have an insight or experience or an idea or just another perspective, or there's something useful that you like learned or heard someplace else. And, I struggled with that personally, communicating that for years. I mean, I just remember, I had a like a horrible experience in an English class in high school one time where I don't even remember what was said, but I completely remember the feeling of like, well, that's the last time I speak up, until I can figure out what it is that I'm trying to say. And you pair that with the fact that I'm an external processor, as I like to say. I really actually have to talk to get clarity sometimes. Whew, it's a bad combination. So as I started to learn these lessons for myself, how could I figure out what somebody was actually asking? How could I get clearer in what I was saying? How could I particularly if I was trying to be clear on what I was saying so I could help someone make a transformational change. When I first had the opportunity now 11 years ago to work with TEDx, which was previously TEDx Cambridge, to help other people make transformational change. That's when I really started to decode what were some of these lessons, approaches, frameworks, principles that I had started to intuit, that I used. I tried to figure out how can I make these lessons transferable? Mostly because, again, it feels awful, and also just for more of a starry-eyed idealist standpoint, there's so many good ideas out there, and for them to get stuck where they are for whatever reason, whether that's in one industry or in one person's mind, or in academia or whatever, because of a solvable problem, which is how it's articulated. Like,
Mm.
I can't. No, like, that's just, it is, that is just, the idea of that is viscerally painful for me. So, that's very much where a lot of the drive for this came from. It's just like, I struggled with it. I don't want other people to struggle with it. And so now it's just, how can I help people help other people make transformational change?
What I love about you is that you've always been an influential voice, and
Hmm.
you, no matter what is going on with you, you understand that by sharing your voice, it's in service, and it's more important for you to know and for you to share your voice than it is for you to be comfortable. And that's something
Oh,
that I've
yeah.
always
Yeah.
seen
Thank
you
you.
do.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, to me, the idea, whatever it is the most important thing. It's, as fellow, lovers of story and of narrative. I mean, to me, it's, I'm increasingly thinking that a lot of the solutions to a lot of our problems is putting a narrative at the center, a shared narrative at the center. And ideas are, the idea is part of that narrative. Like, we're trying to do a thing, we're trying to get this thing to happen in this way, and why. I just think that, gosh, there's so many things that, yeah, I know that it is that I'm not necessarily, that it's not necessarily common, but I cannot imagine being any other way. Like,
Mhm.
that my own comfort would be a reason not to do something. But actually, related to that, another of these phrases that I myself couldn't unhear, which was particularly resonant because it spoke to me about my panic, was is this quote from, of all things, like Baz Luhrmann's first big movie called Strictly Ballroom, which is just this random thing that, like, everybody knows him for, like, Moulin Rouge and,
I
Romeo and
love
Juliet.
Strictly
Yeah,
Ballroom's amazing.
I love Strictly Ballroom. But there's this woman, one moment, then this moment where, like, the main female character, like, is yelling at the main male character in Spanish, and in Spanish she says that a life lived in fear is a life half lived.
Ugh.
And I was fully into my panic disorder at that point, and I just remember going, that's part of what made, like, having panic disorder, like, just intolerable to me to accept that it was a thing that I had to deal with forever. And so the first time I had a therapist who said, "Well, why do you think you have to live with it?" I'm like, "Wait, I don't? Well, it's darn skippy then. Let's work on it, because, I life lived in fear is a life half lived." And, that's, I think that, I hadn't really made that connection before, but that, I think, is so deeply part of how of a principle that I think
Yeah.
is aligns with me in the world, is that, like, again, fear is not, you know, no, quote another of my celebrity crushes, DVF, Diane von Furstenberg, like, fear is just not an option. Like,
Yeah.
it's not an option if I want to live fully, if I want to serve fully, if I want to help people be able to fulfill whatever they're trying to do. Um, my fear is not a reason to do that. That's, I mean, and I have as we've already talked about, I have a very intimate relationship with fear. Um, but it definitely got to a point where I'm like, "Hey, you're not the boss of me."
That's
So,
right. And for everybody who's listening and watching, if you're letting fear be the boss of you, listen to what Tamsen is saying and give yourself permission to coexist.
yes. Yeah, and that actually is for me, that was a significant part of the answer, was it's so counterintuitive, but there was this I'm sure it's not this way necessarily for everybody, but it very much felt like a switch flipped in my mind when I made the decision to just let myself panic. I mean, in that moment where I'd feel it, I would just, it was, again, a narrative that I assembled because it was a combination of having to pick apart what were the main levers that caused it. And one of them was, again, coming from this family of guessers and askers, plus my own wiring as a perfectionist, fully own that. That's me. That there was this kind of shame associated with this not normalness of having a panic disorder because nobody else in my family had a panic disorder. Though I have to say, I love my family. And now looking at them with adult eyes, I'm like, y'all all do struggle with anxiety. It may not be a panic disorder, but I see you. And so that was part of it, this not normal piece of it. And then I was also like, then there's this natural instinct to fight it. But the way just our brains work is the more that you fight it, the worse that it gets. And so it really was this process of saying to myself, that when I panicked, understanding that for me, any strong emotion triggered panic. It wasn't just, you know, oh my gosh, I'm stressed. Oh my God. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm excited. Oh my gosh, I'm nervous. Oh my gosh, I'm happy. And I was like, having that realization was, it meant that whenever I started to feel panic, I would just say, well, this is normal for me. That for very good reasons over years, I have developed this. This is my coping mechanism. So, this is what, for whatever reason, for now, my body and my mind needs. So, this is normal for me. The only way out of this panic attack is through it.
Yeah.
So, just let it go. Right. And honestly, again, this may not be for everybody, but for me, it stopped them in their tracks. I mean, it just, as soon as I gave myself permission to panic and realized that it was normal for me, I
That's
didn't
incredible.
anymore. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's so amazing. Let's transition into Say What They Can't Unhear, the 9 principles of lasting change.
Yes.
Let's talk about this amazing book a little bit. What inspired you to write this?
What inspired me to write it was, like a lot of things, seeing a gap between, particularly since so much of my work is focused on helping people help other people make transformational change. I saw and recognized certain problems, certain issues, certain challenges coming up over and over again. One, that just people didn't know how to do that, right? That there just isn't, either the advice that was out there just didn't seem to be working for them for whatever reason. And I would look at that and go, yeah, but okay, I can see why maybe what you're doing isn't working because I've seen it. I've seen seeing a counterpoint over here. Another challenge I would say with people would get they would get people to feel great, let's say after a talk, or, salespeople would get a yes, and then people would ghost them, or the audience would just, be like, well, that was fun, but yeah, I'm not doing anything different. So they would get yeses, but they wouldn't last. And then the last thing I was seeing over and over again, and yet again, I knew kind of what was necessary, both from my own experience and the research that I'd done to get there. And the last thing was that even with all of those things, there was just discomfort with what I refer to in the book as the stick and the ick, meaning the stick of like not being comfortable with like this reward or punishment or pain or fear-based messaging to get people to change. Again, I've spent so long with fear that I certainly do not want to be somebody who triggers it and somebody else. Why would I do that? That's like
Yeah.
awful. Um, or that even if something worked as far as getting someone to do something, again, a concept I'm deeply uncomfortable with to begin with, it created that kind of icky feeling. And so because I never liked those things, because I had spent so much time working on like, what do you say? How do you get people, and not how do you get people, but how do you create the conditions for transformational change, whether that's at the individual level, all the way up to the market or society level. It's like, I'm not seeing these lessons out there. And they're clearly needed. And I have thoughts. And not only do I have thoughts, I've got research that backs it up, that's not just, not just my experience. And also I have now these years and years and years of putting these principles into practice so that I know they work, and I know they work from a number of different perspectives. So, yeah. And I also wanted to just write a book that people would want to buy, that's, to be honest.
I love it. I think it's really useful. And I think it's also something that people can be inspired by, but also take the tactical action so
Yes.
that they can really understand how to transformationally change for themselves. And I also love what you said. It's also bigger.
Yeah.
So, the transformational change of humanity and of society and culture and all the things that you're
Yes.
working so hard and so beautifully on,
Oh,
inspiring us in that
thank
way.
you. Thank you.
You're so
I mean,
welcome.
it's, honestly, what the best part about all of this is that it's actually not hard. And
Right.
it's so counterintuitive into some way, because I think there are so many things, and I certainly saw this with weight loss. I certainly saw this with my panic disorder. We have somehow been um kind of socialized to think, and I think this is more of a Western thing than anything else, that it has to be a struggle, like that
Mm.
success has to come after struggle. And I know that there's research that says that you appreciate it more, and like stories don't exist without conflict, but it doesn't have to be that hard, right? Like there are like,
Yeah.
one of the classic story shapes is just starts down and just goes up, right? Like that is a classic story shape. It doesn't always have to be like, you can start in the struggle and then emerge from it. And it doesn't have to be this constant back and forth. And so, I mean, that was part of it. I just wanted to get to a point where not only did this fill a gap, but it also felt as natural, as actionable, and as aligned with the folks that I think kind of want this similar thing in the world as well. They want to help people create transformational change. They don't want to do it in a manipulative way. And they just don't somehow feel like it doesn't have to be hard, does it? And I'm here to say, nope, doesn't.
It does not. It does not. Amazing. Everybody, this book, we will put the links to it in the show notes. Say What They Can't Unhear, the 9 Principles of Lasting Change. Tamsen, are you ready for some fast talk?
Yes. Yes. I'm just indecisive. So I'm gonna do my best.
It's all perfect. It's all perfect. What's your favorite book?
Today, my favorite book is The Notebooks of Lazarus Long by Robert Heinlein. It's an excerpt from Time Enough for Love.
Amazing. Who's your favorite speaker right now and why?
Today, the speaker that came to mind was the incomparable Sally Hogshead. She has long been one of my favorites, and I have, she's now a dear friend, which is super fun. But she started as kind of the person that I most wanted to be like on stage, and I just think she's a marvelous combination of being exactly who she is, having a distinct and different point of view. And she's just a marvelous human in general.
She,
And so,
she's
shouldn't we all be like that?
she sure is. I love Sally as well. How do you memorize?
I go idea by idea. So I mean, part of the reason why I built the red thread in the first place was to solve my own memorization issues. And so if I need to remember something word for word or very, very specifically, I build memory palaces. Those are my favorite. I was doing that. I was doing that yesterday with TEDx New England. But it for me is writing and repetition. I remember one time seeing Sarah Silverman interviewed by James Lipton on Inside the Actors Studio, and it was one of the first time I ever heard a stand-up comedian talk about writing it out. Of course, kind of some of the male comedians like Jerry Seinfeld are very, famous for just like scripting to a T, to a fairly well.
Yeah,
And she was like, "Yeah, I write the script out once, and then I just, then it's in my head, and then I just toss it, and then I work it on its feet." And I was like, "That's what I do." So, yeah, I get the basic outline and then just work it and work it and work it on its feet until it's in my head.
amazing. Perfect. What do you do the day before you speak in preparation?
Drink lots of water. I think I consciously try to make sure that the 2 nights before I speak, I get good sleep. And that it's a trick I learned back in my marathon running days, because you probably aren't going to sleep. I'm not going to sleep well the exact night before, but as long as you get good sleep 2 nights before, you're pretty good. And again, that may be totally untrue, but I am living it and I'm believing it and it works for me. But drink lots and lots and lots and lots of water the day before. Um, yeah, other than that, I don't really have any other rituals. I think, if I'm traveling, I try to be as pampery to myself as I can. So I'll take like a black car to the airport and things like that. But other than that, it's just sleep and water.
Perfect. That's very smart. What podcast are you currently obsessed with, if any?
Oh my gosh, not, I wish I could tell you that I am. And my husband, who is like basically, who is a partner in what is the de facto, um, association for the podcasting industry, is always horrified that I don't listen to them.
Well,
And
you
so
have other things. You're
I
making
do.
transformational change happen in the world, Tamsen.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. But I will point to one that's currently hosted by the person who used to be my favorite podcast. And that's a woman named Ashley Hamer. And she has a podcast now called Taboo Science, which she's amazing. I just love, badass women who love science. So
Awesome.
I would recommend her.
Perfect. We'll put all that in the show notes as well.
Super.
From episode 21 to episode 632, thank you
Gosh.
for coming back and joining us here at the Big Talk Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you. Where can our listeners get in touch with you, Tamsen?
I am literally the only Tamsen Webster in the searchable universe, so it's not hard to find me. Best place to get me directly is probably LinkedIn, or if you want to head on over to my current, not so pet project, messagedesigninstitute.com.
Amazing. And everybody grab a copy of your book. It will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for dropping in with us today. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscription notification bell so you get access to the latest videos. Again, everybody, thank you so much for dropping in. Remember, your voice matters.